Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm a member of crew here at Baltic, and today I'm going to be talking you through Jala Wahid's exhibition, Conflagration. So conflagration is a word that has a dual meaning. It means both conflict and also a fire that is incredibly difficult to put out, and both meanings relate to the central premise of this exhibition. So this exhibition is about the discovery of oil in Babagagur, which is an oil field in the region disputed between federal Iraq and Kurdistan. When the British forces first entered this area and took control of what is known as Mesopotamia, they basically signed a treaty with Iraq that wiped Kurdistan out from the maps, from the treaty, from being able to lay any claim over to land that once belonged to the Kurdish people. And this is incredibly personal for Jala Wahid because her father was from that region and was exiled. Jala herself was not able to visit her cultural homeland until after the invasion of Iraq by British forces. So it's a very, very powerful and emotive exhibition for Jala. When you first walk into this exhibition space, you can't help but feel that you've been transported into some other world. The lighting is incredibly dim in here, and the main sources of light come from the sculpture itself, which has a light inside, and also this piece on the wall, which is titled Sick Pink Sun, 3 a.m., 14th of October, 1927, with no end date. This refers to the hour and day that oil was first struck in the fields at Babagagur. The sun itself, Sick Pink Sun, comes from one of the sound pieces in the room. It's one of the lyrics that Jala wrote for her sound piece that accompanies this entire exhibition. So the colour of the sun in this exhibition actually comes from Jala looking at photos of when the oil fields during struggles for power, control, particularly during ISIS bombings of these regions, the bombs themselves would react with the natural fumes that come from drilling oil up from these fields, and they would cover the entire regions in these toxic clouds that would colour what is usually quite a beautiful natural light source, something unnatural like this pink here. And basically, this is another way that Jala uses her eye and her artist's interpretation to make something that on first glance looks quite beautiful, but actually belies the very sinister undercurrent of what goes on with oil in this region. As a visitor, probably one of the first things that you notice when you come into this space is the sculpture itself. So this is named for Babagagur, and we get quite a lot of people attempting to guess what the sculpture might be. It's actually an abstracted form of a flower endemic to North African regions, but also the oil field which it's named for. It's called the Salvia spinosa flower, and Jala did a lot of research going to places like Kew Gardens to learn about this flower and why it thrives so well in this region. And she found it quite interesting, the contrast between two natural things occurring in one place, being the oil and the flower, one having such a high value attached to it and the other basically being ignored by anyone who wished to make a profit. So by turning the flower itself into art, it's almost as though she is giving value to that flower. So the sculpture itself was first modelled by Jala in her workshop out of clay, a very tiny form which she said she worked on for many, many days, and it wasn't until the final stages of planning that she realised exactly how she wanted it to look. It was partially designed using 3D software on computers, and then it was made out of polystyrene and perspex, so it's deceptively light considering how solid it looks. The paint that is used on the sculpture is actually the same kind of paint that is used to cover cars, and I find that really, really interesting that the car industry is so reliant on oil, and here and now is something used in the car industry being used to be critical of oil and the oil industry. The paint itself has this really slick, shiny effect that again evokes oil without any oil actually having to be present in the exhibition, and that's something that Jala was really passionate about, not wanting to have oil present. The sculpture itself, as I've mentioned, is an abstracted form of the Salvia spinosa. This came about because of Jala's research into memorials, and particularly war memorials, thinking about the way that this region has been fought over, controlled, been invaded, and thinking about how to memorialize that. War memorials themselves often are not literal, they are not figurative, they are metaphorical and they are abstract. And in and of themselves, to look at them, they are quite beautiful, though they represent centuries worth of horrors and death. And so we quite often have people, when we talk through this exhibition, wonder why something so beautiful represents something so awful, but Jala's actually continuing in a long tradition of doing just that. The final interesting element to the sculpture itself, which visitors may not notice until they get a little bit closer, is that there is actually a light installation inside the sculpture itself. This is burning red. It represents the natural fires that burn underneath the oil fields. Particularly in the case of Baba Gagur, this is a known fire. It has been written about for millennia now. It's viewed as something quite sacred and spiritual. And when oil drilling happens, these natural flame bursts come up from the ground, and it's almost a release of this immense fire that still burns to this day. So you see that reflected just a little bit in the tip of the sculpture itself, but it's much more visible once you get up close. The final piece of art in this exhibition is a sound piece that runs for almost an hour long, comprised of several different elements. It's called the Naptha Makam, and Makam is a Kurdish term that essentially means it's a song, it's a psalm. Quite often they're sung at funerals, they're used in storytelling. It's an incredibly powerful, evocative piece of song. The makams in this exhibition were written by Jala herself, who likes to use poetry, song. She likes to incorporate a lot of different forms of art into her exhibitions, and they are sung by a very prolific Kurdish singer called Amal Saeed Kurda. When you first enter the space, you would be forgiven for thinking what you're hearing is Kurdish, but actually, though the makams are melodically Kurdish, they're actually written and sung in English. So the longer you spend in the space, the more you can pick out words and your brain starts to switch to being able to hear them. It really makes spending a lot of time in this exhibition space worthwhile.